Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mila and you're at my book nook, and today we are doing Slavic fantasy book recs because I've read quite a few over the years, and this stems from my frustration as someone who is Slavic. I'm half Russian. This stems primarily from my frustration that Shadow and Bone keeps getting recommended as a good fantasy for, Slavic inspired fantasy as well as just a good Russian inspired fantasy. And I have my own gripes with that series. We're not going to go into it today, in this video at least, but if you do want a video about that topic, please do let me know. If I'm looking down, it's because I have my nose on my Kobo. And if I'm looking over here, it's because I'm mirroring the camera, because that's just how it is. Oh, did I not? I don't think I have. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna do this off the top of my head. I won't even need this. There's not a lot of Slavic fantasy books that I have read, but the ones that I have read were amazing and phenomenal, and I gave each of them above a 4-star, which is saying something because I'm very meticulous about this kind of stuff. So, for context, I'm half Russian. Literally every name that I have is Russian. My full name is Russian, the nickname is Russian. Well, my full name is Slavic, but the nickname is a common Russian nickname. And I have a patronymic. Russian's my first language. Everything about me is very Russian, except maybe my complexion, but that's a whole other thing. As I said, half Russian. And there's jellyfish in the back for vibes. So the first book I'm going to talk about is one I recently finished, which is Deathless. Now this is one that's a little bit different to the other ones in the sense that this isn't fantasy heavy. So it's not set in a very fantasy heavy world. It's more that the fantasy is set in the real world. So this is the story of Kashey the Deathless, who is the big bad guy in Russian fairy tales, hence the name Deathless. He comes into this as a person, right? And we follow the main heroine in that story who captures Kashey. In the original folktale, she captures Kashey, she gets married, she tells her husband, Ivan or Ivan, to not go into a very specific room while she's out and fighting, because she's a heroine in her own right. She's a warrior in her own right, and he does not listen to her. And he sees Kashey, and he is chained to the wall, and he gives Kashey water, and I think it's like 12 cups of water, 12 pails of water, and Kashey becomes strong enough to be free of those chains. And then I believe he kills Ivan, but then Ivan's sister's husbands bring him back to life. That's a whole other thing. In either case, Kashey flees. He runs away, and then he finds Maria Morevna, the main heroine, and he kidnaps her. And now Ivan has to go and save his wife, all because he didn't listen to his wife who said not to go looking in the first place. I digress. Anyways, this was absolutely fantastic, and I need to go through this and annotate it, but I really enjoyed this because this is set during the 20th century, and this is sort of the turning point of Russian history where, the Romanovs are killed, the Russian Revolution happens, and then you have the Soviet Union, sort of comes into power and everything, and the effects of that on the common people, those that don't have a lot whatsoever. And there's some pretty dark instances, obviously, since we're following these fairly dark times for a lot of people, where there's famine, people just die of starvation. Like, they die because there's not enough food, and they're killed, there's bombs and stuff like that, and basically Maria Morevna witnesses her sisters being taken away by husbands, obviously, and you see sort of the progression of the history through those husbands with the way that they introduce themselves. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but if you'd like to see my vlog, I do have a vlog with this book where I read it. I recently finished it. And honestly, I feel like all you need to know is that there's a committee of damavois, and damavois are this household creature. And it's so funny. It is so funny. And it's such a love letter to Russian culture and history and the people and the fairy tales. And it was so masterfully done. And if you are a history nerd and you want to see 20th century Russia, you know, at the pinnacle when the tides are turning, and you want to see it also through a fairy tale folklore lens, I would highly recommend this one. It's definitely a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I would so highly recommend this one. I'll read you the first sentence of the first chapter. Not the prologue, but I'll read you the first sentence. Because I think if that doesn't capture you, I don't know what will. In a city by the sea, which was once called St. Petersburg, then Petrograd, then Leningrad, then much later St. Petersburg, again, there stood a long thin house on a long thin street. By a long thin window, a child in a pale blue dress and pale green slippers waited for a bird to marry her. I feel like you don't really need to know anything else. I will have a full-length review out where I have more coherent thoughts about this, but this was so good. So good. So that is Deathless by Catherine M. Valente. The next one, going with the theme of Russia, continuing with the theme of being set in Russia, I figured we would go back even further in time, since we're talking about historical, and I shall recommend you The Witch and the Tsar by Lacey Salnikova Gilmore. If you followed me for a while, whether it's on my Instagram or on here on YouTube, ever since I read this book, I haven't reread it, which I think, given the weather outside, I feel like I should reread it. I have not shut up about this book. Every moment that I'm able to recommend this book, I do. And in this case, it's the perfect themed video for this. And yeah, this was such a fascinating portrait of 16th century Russia. I always forget what the century is. So 16th century Russia during the reign of Ivan. Well, a little bit before, and then during the reign of Ivan the Terrible, and sort of what the horrors that he unleashes on his own people, because he's the Tsar, you know, of Russia. What was Russia at the time. And this follows, I realized I didn't start telling you what this is about, but this was fantastic. This is a feminist retelling of Baba Yaga, of the story of Baba Yaga. In this case, she's called Yaga, because Baba is the word sort of like a shortened form of babushka, which means like old, like grandma. In the case of Baba Yaga, it's that she's an old hag, an old witch, you know, she's not exactly a good person. So basically, we follow a young Yaga. She's a half goddess, so she's the daughter of I remember Mokosh, I think, the goddess, I believe, of life or something like that. And so she's a half goddess, and she has magic, and her friend Anastasia comes all the way from Moscow to tell her that like she's sick, and the healers don't know what's going on. There's sort of, they don't know what's going on. And so her friend Anastasia comes all the way from Moscow being like, I am being poisoned. No one can figure out what it is. Please help me. So Yaga has to travel all the way to Moscow. And Yaga is a witch, right? She's a Vedьма. She does not cooperate with the expectations that is set upon her. There is sort of like the whole hair thing. Like she keeps her hair loose, I think, whereas the ladies in the palace and stuff keep their hair up and covered and stuff. So there's definitely noticeable differences, and this was so good. It is a very much a full circle novel, and it doesn't just have like the folkloric element of the Russian fairy tale of Baba Yaga, but it also has obviously the historical landmarks, right? Like the palaces and the people, the real people. Tsarevna Anastasia was a real person. Tsar Ivan was a real person. And his sons were real, you know, a lot of the historical characters are there. And then, yeah, so this was really good, and it's very full circle, and there's also, it's a Slavic mythology in this, so there's the Slavic gods, as I mentioned, Makosh, and Marzana, I think, is in this, and Pirun is in this, and I can't, off the top of my head, I don't remember who else was in this. V or Vedis, I think it is. I don't remember, but this was overall fantastic, and I would highly, highly recommend. When I read this, this was like my favorite book of that year. So, if it fits, I don't think it's gonna, oh, it fits. Okay, cool. So, the next book I don't have a physical copy of. I have a physical copy of the second book, which is so funny. The publisher sent it to me. I guess they ran out of physical copies for the first one, which is what I initially requested. But anyways, the next one is going to be Foul Days by Genevieva Dimova, as well as Monstrous Nights, which is the sequel. This is a Finnish duology. This is Slavic folklore and Bulgarian folklore, specifically because it's specific because some areas of the Slavic world don't have, like, a lot of the stories overlap, but some are very region-based. And so, how do I continue this? This is set in a totally, like, new world, and we follow our main character, Kasara, who's a witch, and a witch's power comes from a shadow. And she lives in the walled city of Chernograd, and on the outskirts is the city of Belgrade. Belgradians are vibing, they're chilling, they're having a good time. The Chernogradians are not having a good time. After New Year's, you have 12 days where the veil for the monsters is very, very thin, so the monsters come through. And you have Kikimoras, you have Rusalkas, you have all these different creatures, and at the top of the food chain, so to speak, is Zmei, the Tsar of monsters. And Kasara has a past with the Tsar of monsters, so on one of the days, the foul days, between the New Year's and the 12th day, she figures out that someone has sold her out to Zmei and has told him her location, despite her putting up, you know, spells and protections and making sure that no one tells him, like, making sure to, like, cover her tracks and everything. And so she gets caught, basically. She, you know, Tsar is coming down the lane, so to speak, to where she is. And she bargains away her shadow to a stranger, and that stranger takes her across the wall. Now, the wall is alive. The wall is alive in order to keep Chernogradians in and Belgradians out, and it's also alive to keep the monsters in so that they don't go out and attack the Belgradians. There's another layer to that wall. I'm not going to say anything, but there's definitely another layer to that. So Kasara bargains away her shadow, and when a witch bargains away their shadow, they develop a sickness, and eventually they will become a shadow if they don't get a shadow back. And she realizes that hers is faster than it's supposed to be, because of course it is! We're gonna overlook that. But basically, she gets caught up in this sort of murder investigation with this Belgradian cop whose name is Asin, and there's like connections and all that stuff. And this was really fantastic. I thought it was such a unique premise. I've never really read anything like this. I thought it was so much fun. I read the second book in a day. I received the ARC the day before. Okay, I received an e-ARC the day before. And then I loaded it onto my Kobo. And then the next day I had work. So I read on the train, I read before my shift, sort of during my shift, and, you know, and then I read on the way home on the bus, and my Kobo was like dying at 10%, and I was praying to any god that would listen that it would not die on me just as I was about to finish the book. I think I enjoyed book 1 more than book 2, but I think both were very, very solid reads, and I think with book 1, she really set up the world in a very interesting manner, and I loved Kasara, I loved Asin, I did not like this mate. I like the found family that Kasara didn't really realize she had, because she's very much, I'm independent, I can do whatever I want, you know, I can do things myself, I don't need help. And then she realizes that, yeah, she does need help, and she does have people she can rely on. So that was a great one. That was a really, really good one. And the last book I have is called Where the Dark Stands Still by A.B. Pornick. It's called Where the Dark Stands Still by A.B. Pornick, and this is specifically Polish folklore. And yes, again, there are overlaps, but this is very much rooted in specifically Polish folklore, in sort of specifically the Polish way of writing things, writing certain words in English, sort of like the Polish transliteration writings in English. And so, this one is a YA fantasy, and I read this last year. Holy cow! I read this last year. Oh my god. I read this last year, and I really enjoyed it because this felt almost like a warm hug. It had a really interesting premise. Our main girl, Liska, has powers. She doesn't really understand these powers, and she certainly doesn't want them. And in her village, she's ostracized. Her father passed away. There's a sort of death that sort of looms over her, and you're not sure what the details are, and she feels guilty. And she sort of buried the memories away. And basically, she goes in search of this mysterious fern flower, which is said to grant whoever finds it a wish. And it blooms only one night a year. And so she goes during this like festival, and she goes to find this fern flower, and she finds it, but she also finds the guardian of the forest, the Leji. And basically the Leji's like, okay, you're gonna live with me for a year, right? And after that year's up, I will help you get rid of your powers. Like, I'll take your powers. So she's like, okay, fine, like no one's gonna want me anyways. And so it ensues that, you know, Leji is like a sort of grump, and Liska is very much homey and very inviting and very a warm person, despite the fact that people have ostracized her. And I think this was such a cute novel as well. And I didn't rate this one 5 stars like I rated the other 5 stars, just because, yeah, I can't really tell you why, but anyways. So that is it for this video. I apologize for the strange lighting. The sun is going down, although it's very cloudy, so unfortunately that's all I had time for today. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider checking out my other videos, including my Deathless vlog and other vlogs and videos. And please check out all my other socials. I'm mainly on Bookstagram, so check that out for stuff that you will probably not see here. And with that, I bid you adieu. Paka paka. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down below. And I will see you in the next one. Happy reading!